Story 1. Crane broke with my farmer uncle in it. He cartwheeled through 40 feet in the air and landed on his back. Broken hip, broken back, broken arm, brain bleed, blood pouring out of his face, unresponsive, gasping for air. I was positive that I was watching him die while trying to make the call to 911. He threaded the needle with where and how he landed. Made a 95% recovery at 75 years old. Just has a slight limp. Story 2. My dad beat my mom and tried to kiss her to make up. When she refused his kiss, he pushed her up against the wall and pinned her there, bit a small chunk of her bottom lip off and spit it at me. Still makes me cry when I randomly notice the scar. Story 3. Drive-by shooting during a street party. After the body was taken away, some teenagers made footprints in the blood and laughed about it. Lost a little faith in humanity that day. Story 4. An elderly man was hit in a grocery parking lot by someone backing up. He hit his head on the ground and died that night. It was Veterans Day, and he was a veteran who went only to get a free donut. We kind of knew he wasn't going to make it. He had a lot of blood coming out of his head, and it was everywhere. He was conscious. He was around 90 years old. We stayed with him until the ambulance came and took him 40 minutes away to a hospital more equipped than what our town had. He ended up in a coma and died that night. We don't know what happened, why he was in a coma, if he died naturally, or if his family decided to discontinue life support. It was very sad. Someone asked, yes, he did get his donut. He was eating it when he was hit. I felt bad for the lady that hit him. There was snow and ice on the ground, and she said her car slipped. She wasn't backing up fast. It was very slow, and she seemed to be cautious. I think he must not have been in her sight because he was aligned with the middle of the trunk of his car, walking back to his side to get back inside. Story 5. The lady who jumped over the balcony into the lobby at the Marriott Marquis in Atlanta a few months ago hit the kiosk before hitting the lobby floor, which cut her in half and then exploded when she finally hit the floor. It was pretty crazy. Story 6. My ex stabbed me and then choked me, asking why he shouldn't kill me. I wonder what brings a person to that type of evil. I'll never forget the darkness I felt coming from that boy and how evil he looked. He was insane and intense. I never felt true fear in my life until I laid on the floor in a literal pool of my blood after he left. And it was just red and confusion. Story 7. Saw a guy jump in front of a train at a metro station once. He was standing right next to me before it happened. It happened so quickly. Left me frozen for a few seconds. Story 8. I watched my lifelong best friend die on a sidewalk in 2019. Then I had to call his widowed mother, his twice widowed sister, who were his only remaining family, and his girlfriend of 10 years. They had just gotten engaged. It was really messed up, man. Story 9. When I was 10, I was hanging out with a couple of friends, riding our bikes. This truck came flying down the road, and we jumped out of the way. One of my friends didn't make it. He almost made it, which made it even worse for him. The truck swerved to avoid us, and in the process, my friend's leg was run over, and he was dragged for what seemed like an eternity. He screamed, which damn near drowned out the sound of the truck's screeching tires. I was told I saw it, but I don't have any memory of seeing anything. Only the horrific sounds. There was very little left of my friend's face after being dragged so far on the pavement. Just thinking about it makes me want to cry. Another time, when I was 13, I was in a wreck with my mom and brother. After it was over, my mom said I looked at her and screamed. Again, I don't remember that part. My mom's nose was split in half like a Venus flytrap. We never knew how that happened, but it did. I'm so glad I don't have that image in my head as well. Edit. It's constantly being asked, but no. My friend didn't survive. The damage to his body and face was far too severe. Story 10. One time I went to the bathroom at Burger King, and there was an enormous, black, feces-covered suction cup dildo stuck to the wall. It was as thick as a soda can and probably 14 inches long. There was feces all the way to the base and on the wall. Story 11. My ex ran me over with his truck. I have 5 broken ribs and a collapsed lung. Chest tubes are no joke when you're conscious. They hurt terribly. He was sentenced to 10 years in jail and got out after 3 on good behavior. The justice system is flawed. Story 12. I'm a firefighter and I've seen some difficult situations. The ones that stick in my head are mostly about children. I distinctly remember one. His burns were extreme, to say the least. All we could do was try to cool them until the ambulance arrived. All he could do was howl, a long, guttural wail that I can still hear as if I was there today. He didn't last long. Another was a wildfire body search, where a parent wrapped themselves over their young child to try and save them from the inevitable. The worst part is how these experiences torture your mind for years afterward. In your dreams, they become your own children or partner, but the memory itself is still there, and you know it's not real. Story 13. Warning. Graphic. Child death. I used to transfer deceased people for a living. I would go to where their bodies were and take them to a funeral home or morgue. One time, a child who was around 9 years old was beaten to death with a bat. I went to retrieve him, and he was covered with a sheet. I could tell by the way the sheet sank in over his head that his skull was crushed. There was blood everywhere, and the room felt thick and damp. I placed him into a bag, and when I rolled him to his side, the remnants of his face fell off. He was horrific. I started sobbing and telling him I was so sorry and that I would take care of him. Story 14. Watching a person burn alive in their vehicle because they selflessly saved the many instead of the one. A trucker whose brakes failed because they caught on fire. Cars were catching on fire as he passed them down one of the steepest grades in the state. He ran his truck into the ditch between the roadways. His wife got out, but he was stuck and screaming. To this day, I remember the screams. I was 10. I'm 5 times that now. That poor man. Story 15. I come from a bad neighborhood, and a close friend was a professional car thief when I was younger. I have been shot at more than once, and to top it all off, I worked in emergency medical services and disaster relief when I was younger. To say I have thick skin would be an understatement. My list is long, but I will share the 2 worst experiences I have witnessed. One was during my days in emergency medical services when we received a call about a 380-pound man who was dead in his chair. We had to call the fire department for assistance to cut the chair out from the fluids that leaked from him and hardened into the chair. He had been dead for a couple of days. Luckily, the rest was the fire department's and the coroner's headache. The fluids, smell, decaying flesh, and the fact that no one checked on him, plus days of old food all over a filthy house, will haunt me until the day I die. The second was while doing disaster relief after Hurricane Katrina. We were gutting houses down to the frames to be restored later with Habitat for Humanity. I won't even get into the bodies and pets we found in the process, but the worst, absolute worst, experience was when my team was moving out an old refrigerator. Our method was to wrap it and strap it before moving, but some idiot didn't strap it. While moving it, the lid opened. The smell was so bad that the team dropped it and it spilled. A year-old refrigerator that sat filled with dirty, still water with decaying food and meat. The smell was so bad it made the whole team vomit. Work had to stop at all the houses for half a block. It was that putrid. They had to have the hazardous materials team come to ensure it wasn't toxic, and it turned out the mold inside was dangerous. The whole team had a hazmat scrub down, but the smell lingered for 2 days, not at the same level, but the hint and reminder of it remained. Physical injury no longer phases me. I've seen too many bullet holes and critical car injuries. It's the gross stuff that is really disturbing to me now. Story 16. When I was 17 years old, I found the body of a man who had hanged himself in the woods. I was hiking with my brother and our friend. After a moment of shock, I ran over to see if he might still be alive. His skin was discolored and his eyes were bulging out of his head. This was during a time in my life when I was struggling with depression myself and was considering taking my own life at one point. Finding him there was immensely sad and really helped me put everything into perspective. It was a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Story 17. Most recently, my 15-year-old cat died of cancer in my arms. She went into shock, was shaking, stiffening up, maybe having seizures. She died right in front of me while I screamed and cried. I loved her so much. The cancer was found too late for treatment, and she was so old that she deteriorated quickly. The whole thing was terrible to witness, and it looked so painful. Worst day of my life, honestly. It happened 2 months ago, and I still cry thinking about her and the whole incident. Story 18. Not my first-hand story, but it still haunts me. Two little girls aged 3 and 5 would go to the community wading pool, which was supervised by city-employed instructors who were students pursuing education degrees. My sibling was an instructor for a few summers while getting her degree. These two sisters would go daily, all day, every day. They wore too small clothing and outgrown shoes. One day, my sibling saw them huddled by a tree near the pool, and when she approached, she saw they were eating a ball. They were so hungry that they were eating a large foam ball. I still can't get the image she described out of my head. My sibling contacted the appropriate people, and the sisters and their mother received help, but the mother overdosed a while later. I believe the sisters were actually adopted by the older one's kindergarten teacher a couple of years later, and they are thriving little girls who are very happy and cared for. Story 19. While there was nothing gruesome about this, I was in the same hotel room as my dad when I was 23, when he passed away from natural causes. He woke me up in the middle of the night making strange noises, which I found out later was agonal breathing. I turned on the light and immediately noticed his color was blue. I immediately called 911 and did CPR on him until the paramedics arrived. We were in a hotel 5 hours away from home because of a job he had to do. He also rented a Ford F-250 because our car at the time was unreliable. I also took Ambien to help me sleep. When I asked the paramedics if they could drive me with them to the hospital because I was in an unfamiliar area, I had never driven anything bigger than a car, I had taken my Ambien, and my father was obviously dying. Despite all that, they told me no. They basically yelled no to my face. I had to drive a giant Ford F-250 truck I was unfamiliar with, just to be with my dad in his last moments. Story 20. I work in the emergency room. An ambulance comes in with a 2-year-old, choking, CPR in progress. Everybody gets to work. I take over CPR. The child is blue, cold, pulseless every time we pause to check. We continue for probably 20 minutes, the longest 20 minutes of my life. Before the doctor officially pronounced the time of death, the parents wanted to come in and say goodbye. As I take over and begin my 4th rotation being the one giving chest compressions, the parents come in, standing directly next to me and talk to the child. I will never forget the mom singing, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine," while I feel this crunched sternum grinding under my palm. That was 7 years ago, and it still crosses my mind almost every day. Story 21. Walked in and discovered my deceased father about 5 years ago. He was on the ground, and reality hadn't sunk in until about 10 seconds after repeatedly calling his name, asking if he was okay. I'm all right now. A lot of change has happened since then. Story 22. A British father on holiday with his family in Koh Samui, his wife and 2 kids. He and his wife were on their own moped with a child each. The father went normally through a roundabout, but the bike slipped on the exit, and he slid right under a huge truck tire. His head was crushed because he wasn't wearing a helmet, but the child was. There was so much blood. I will never forget the wife's wailing and the kids in shock. Story 23. I don't know if this is the most disturbing thing, but it's the first thing that came to mind. When I was a little kid, I watched a couple of planes touch wings and crash into Lake Ontario. This was the Snowbirds crash at Toronto's Canadian National Exhibition on September 3, 1989. Think of it like an enormous state fair that ends with a weekend-long air show, and the Snowbirds are Canada's aerial acrobatics team like the United States Navy's Blue Angels. Anyway, I was just a little kid on my swing set in the backyard. I won't swear I saw the wingtips touch. I remember it, but memory plays funny tricks. I am completely sure I saw a plane catch fire and a pilot eject and deploy his parachute as his plane plunged into the water. I ran into the house to tell my mother what I'd seen, and she thought it was just one of those things an imaginative little boy dreams up until she saw it on the news that night. I'm sure I've seen worse things in my life, but 2 planes crashing where one pilot clearly got out and the other didn't. Basically having someone die in front of me as a little kid is a pretty big deal. Story 24. The White Husky. I was in my car, coming home from college. My sister was in the car in front of me. She was helping me move. We were on the highway doing 70. In front of her was a semi. It was a pretty dense highway with lots of traffic. The white husky sprang from the side of the median, from a tall swath of grass. It ran in front of the semi, so happy and carefree. We know the semi could not slam on its brakes. Story 25. I saw a man who had been stabbed in the stomach asking for a police officer to save his life while he was bleeding out. I didn't like that. In the United States, I also saw a fire that consumed a house with a family in it due to a drone strike here in Ukraine. I never saw something burn so hard and bright in the night. Story 26. My neighbor shot himself. His wife didn't have renter's insurance and we live in a trailer park, so we are pretty poor. My husband and I couldn't bear the thought of one of us having to clean up the other's blood, bone fragments, and brain matter off the walls and floor after something so awful if it had happened to us. So we did it for her. My husband cleaned the wall behind his head in his sleep for 3 months.